Francis Fukuyama offers a lot of really thoughtful and complex analysis. Most of it is spot on. But this catchy slogan, like the end of history, that was the major problem of the 90s and Putin's dictatorship restoration, that people sort of let it go. We thought the job is done. Now, the hard lesson is that democracy is hard work. Protecting it from authoritarian restoration is hard, everyday work that everybody should focus on. We never completely protect. We should have understood more about hardcore institutional work to be done every day. And we had no idea that authoritarian restoration just doesn't happen overnight. A dictator never comes and says, we abolish democracy, I'm the single ruler from now. No, it's just a very gradual process, like, a frog that is slowly boiling. A lot more was needed to be done in terms of enlightening people, the Russian population, because they really were tired of chaos, not only of the chaos of the 90s. When many people speak about that, they really forget the chaos of the previous decades. 70s and 80s was not an easy, rosy time. It was a very difficult time. We had to struggle for basic food and supplies every day. So a few decades of very chaotic, turbulent times. Many people were actually seduced by the idea of, a strong leadership, a strong man coming and solving all the problems. You don't have to do nothing. Just surrender your basic civil and political rights, and this good daddy will do everything for you. I have to say that this idea was pretty popular in Russia even before Putin emerged as a major political leader. These ideas, after all the difficult times of the 90s, were circulating around a lot. You have separation of powers working. Now, we didn't have that in the 90s. We had some form of freedom, but that was like sort of a volleyball, between parliament and president, the winner takes it all system, right? So everybody was fighting for total control of all the institutions. We didn't build, we didn't really appreciate what separation of power means, that absence of separation of powers leads to authoritarian capture. Next time, next attempt to build democratic Russia, this is what is needed to be done from day one, to establish totally independent branches, judiciary, parliament, regions, local self-governance. Unfortunately, we didn't have that. We were sort of building this overly centralized vertical of power under Yeltsin since the beginning of his rule. Essentially, Putin became his heir in that he just inherited the system which was very convenient for total power grab. That was a mistake. Separation of powers is a precondition for normal democracy. Putin was simply a product of his time. There could have been absolutely a different person in his position, which had probably done the same. A large part of Russian elite, even the civil folks who were never part of military or paramilitary structures, had this revanchist imperialist views. And generally, what happened in 1999, 2000, when Putin just emerged as a new leader, we had on one hand a very inexperienced, politically weak population, which was tired of political turbulence and not really experienced and even bothered, with democratic processes, sort of chaotic thing. And on the other hand, we had this predatory mafia-style nomenclatura, post-Soviet elite, which understood this and wanted to do a power grab. What is important, I'd say probably more important event than Putin's election as president was what happened the next year, the year after in 2001, which was the merger of two rival bureaucratic parties, which seemed to be at odds in 99, pro-Putin Единство and Отечество headed by Evgeny Primakov, the former prime minister, and Moscow mayor Yuri Lushkov. In 99, they seemed to be bitter rivals, but soon it became clear that they have the same agenda. They have very same imperialist, revanchist agenda. They wanted to centralize control over economy, major assets, and financial flows. They wanted to restore centralized governments, so they merged into one party, United Russia. That happened in the middle of 2001. Since then, they won supermajority in parliament, and dictatorship was signed and sealed. In 2000, when Putin was elected president, I was already 27. And I was heading the department in one of the federal regulatory agencies, Federal Energy Commission. This is the analog of American FERC, electricity and gas markets. I was heading a major strategy department there. And listen, that's important for Americans to understand what time that was. I was like a mid-level official in the Russian government, and I was obviously openly against Putin, and I voted for the other candidate, Grigory Yavlinsky, and I openly said it. It was allowed. That was late Yeltsin time. It was absolutely okay to criticize the sitting president and vote against him in elections. Just so you have an idea what time that was. Now, clearly, since Putin was appointed prime minister in August '99, it was very clear that he's actually aiming at turning around all these major decentralization trends and agendas that we were putting forward. I was part of the reformers bloc in the government, which really looked forward to do more decentralization of political and economic power, more power to the regions, to local communities, privatization and exiting control over state property and major state corporations. Now, Putin was showing clear signs of reversing that trend. But the bottom line, first Putin's years were sort of a struggle. And the oil was also cheap, and it was not guaranteed the economic growth would stay. So he was sort of flirting with the idea of reforms, democracy, and so on. Now, I can tell you a story. When I already left the government, but I was still informally advising German Gref, the economic minister and major reformer, sometime in early 2004, when Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of Fed, he actually gave a speech saying that we have now entered an era of an exceptionally high prices of oil. And oil jumped to $50 per barrel back then for the first time ever. So Gref called me, asked me to come to his office, and actually looked at me and said, what's your take? Is Greenspan right? Are we really into an era of a high-priced oil? But in his eyes, I saw a totally different question. The real question was, can we now allow ourselves much more than we ever previously thought we'll be able to do? So that really untied a lot of hands in the Kremlin. This newly accumulated oil wealth really helped to unleash all their imperial ideas, which were contained by economic weakness of Russia. Yeah, the unfortunate part of the whole situation was that population had completely abstained. And here's also an important part. Americans should understand this. Generally, Russians have never accepted dismantling of democratic institutions. Like all the time, like all these past 20 years, if you ask them in opinion polls, do they support abolishing direct elections of city mayors or regional governors, that will be a healthy 2/3 no, all the time. Second thing, parties which supported abolishing democracy were never, popular beyond really a very marginal level. It was even current Putin's rhetoric is like, we have a democracy. People still have a say. Nobody's admitting that this is a dictatorship. And there are many other criteria which shows that Russians really like to have influence on politics, but they were deprived from that against their will. However, in the early Putin's years, they abstained. Everybody was so pleased with unexpected and very fast economic growth. Just to let you know, during first 8 years of Putin in power, average GDP growth was 7% a year on average, and average growth of real disposable income was over 12% a year for 8 years in a row. In early Putin's years, everybody criticized us, saying, folks, you may be right in terms of criticizing the general direction, but economic growth, you can't beat that. This is why Putin gained so much initial popularity, and this is why, unfortunately, people in mass have abstained from politics. That was the biggest mistake of Russians, because when they found out that growth has ended long ago, it was like 2008, as they say, was the last year when Titanic saw daylight. Since then, for almost 14 years in a row, Russia haven't seen meaningful economic growth. We have been warning of that, but it became too late because people were already deprived of political rights and could not influence the situation anymore. This new imperialist anti-Western policy trend had emerged long before Putin. And I'd say the godfather of that was Primakov. the former foreign affairs minister and prime minister of Russia. I used to work in the government when Primakov was heading foreign ministry and later became prime minister. It was already very visible that this, new big dark wave is coming from the top of the Russian power. We stopped considered America and the West as friends, as allies. There came strong Eurasianism, anti-Westernism, and so on. So that was a sort of collective thinking of post-Soviet Russian nomenclatura. Now, second thing is that during first Putin's years, he tried to sort of offer the West a deal, like treat us like Saudi Arabia. I even heard it said once directly by Slava Nikonov, one of the prominent foreign policy figures in Putin's entourage. He said, at one meeting, I don't remember what this was, but he said to some high-level Americans, why do you speak democracy and values to us? Why don't you treat us like Saudi Arabia? Except that we're authoritarian, but let's be allies. This collapsed after the so-called color revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and other post-Soviet space, which Putin clearly took as an attempt of the West to go after him. Let me make it absolutely clear, because I was also observing these processes at close range, and these revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and other post-Soviet countries were genuine, legitimate bottom-up movements of their own populations against the onslaught of Putin-style authoritarianism. They all have protected against rigged elections, which were meant to install Putin-minded, Putin-like autocrats. This popular talk about color revolutions as a thing that is staged from abroad. What was happening in reality is that people of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and others, they were struggling against attempts of dictators to encircle them. That is very important, because if you look at the past 4 years, you see all Putin's Eurasia essentially rioting against mafia dictatorships. 2018, Armenia; 2020, Belarus and Kyrgyzstan; 2022, Kazakhstan; Russia all the time, with a large-scale Navalny protests, which began 5 years ago, right? So one of my friends, Boris Nemtsov, was murdered. Another friend of mine, Alexei Navalny, is right now sitting in jail after being nearly murdered. But my point was, it's very important that all Putin's Eurasia is burning under his feet. For more than 20 years of Putin's rules, Russia have never accepted, majority of Russian population have never accepted abolishing direct elections, elimination of independent parties and censorship in the media, depriving them of opportunity to have a say. If you look at any opinion poll, well, the first thing that people in Russia say that when they're asked the question, what are you most unhappy about? They say we're most unhappy about with the fact that we cannot influence the policy of our government in any way. There's ample amount of data which supports just that. So we see a lot of genuine signs of big bottom-up demand for democracy in Russia. We do not see anything on the contrary. As opposed to what many peoples in the West are saying, that, listen, Russians are like that, they want dictatorships, but there's no empirical data that supports that. There is not a single party which advocates for dictatorship and is popular. There is not a single poll which would say Russians would voluntarily give up their rights. No, they want them back, even according to official Kremlin polling data. I think Putin understood a long time ago that there will come a moment when the Russian people will also claim freedom, pretty much as the people of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and the others. He knows that, which is why all that he's been doing in the past 2 years is doubling down on censorship, doubling down on repression. We now have 2.5 times more official political prisoners than we had in Brezhnev and Andropov times in late Soviet Union, 2 times more, right? I think it's a general pattern. If you look at Maduro in Venezuela, Assad in Syria, Lukashenko in Belarus, the pattern is these regimes completely understand that they can only survive against the will of the people through extreme brutality. So the thing is that, first, Putin, in his rising authoritarian and neo-imperialist policies, he claimed the post-Soviet space as his exclusive zone of influence. And you cannot say that you control post-Soviet space if you do not control Ukraine. That's a jewel in the crown. With all due respect, the rest is not as important and significant as Ukraine. So he was terribly wounded when he actually lost Ukraine 2 times. First in 2004 with the Orange Revolution and the election of Viktor Yushchenko as president. Second time in 2014 with Maidan. He suffered a terrible wound. He was bleeding all these years and thinking of how can I take it back. It's no coincidence that Putin have chosen this moment, because he really considered a new German government to be a very weak part of the chain. Also, your viewers and listeners should know more about relations between Russia and France. First, unfortunately, there's a very strong anti-American sentiment there. Let's be frank about it. I have never confronted the situation in any other major Western capital. When you come to Paris and meet with mid-level and top-level officials, they would, not me, I mean, they would start to talk about how sanctions are hurting French economy. French farmers losing the Russian market. We need to leave them, the sooner the better. Let me be absolutely frank with you. At this particular moment, he considered the West to be particularly weak. There are different estimates of the total capital flight from Russia during the past 20 years of Putin's rule. But the least estimate is $1 trillion. Probably more money were siphoned out of Russia into various pockets in offshores and elsewhere, which is a lot of this money is being used to subvert the Western system, corrupt Western businessmen and politicians, and turn them into willful allies of Putin. Which is why I think right now, I know something because I still have a lot of people whom I know working in Putin's system, and I do have some information about what's going on in there. Putin is absolutely shocked by the extent of unity that is taking place right now in response to his aggression in Ukraine, particularly with regard to going after the oligarchs, their assets, their luxurious properties, and so on. He did not really expect this to happen, but you got to understand that's a very important tool of eroding Western democracies. And last year, I actually written a report. We'll be happy to share that with your viewers. A report for Boris Nemtsov Foundation about Putin's malign influence and network of influence in Western Europe, specifically listing all these various influential players who were actually recruited for money, specifically to promote Putin's interests. So he counted on this nefarious web of influence before the aggression, so that will somehow stop a firm and united, solidified Western response. He grossly miscalculated. And second thing, obviously, they clearly overestimated the capabilities of the Russian army, but I have been speaking volumes about that. This is actually why I thought that the invasion won't happen, because with such a weak army, we cannot get involved in that sort of effort. And this is really something I don't get until this very point. Why did he do this? Essentially knowing that he knew that our military was not capable of undertaking such a major exercise, which is why I think we now have reports that they really counted for just 3 days of blitzkrieg, and they did not even prepare supplies, maintenance, and all other stuff beyond just these 3 days, which means that he really calculated on effective Ukraine surrender. He didn't really think that Ukrainians would resist. He thought that they would run away. So I think these things are connected. He knew that he had some major weaknesses in the army, but he still went for it because he just thought that Ukrainians simply won't resist. Ukrainians' will to resist is growing by the day, because I see that during the first days, they really counted on NATO military intervention, but during the past 3 weeks, they actually learned they have to fight by themselves. Yes, they are supplied with weapons and other stuff, but they have to fight themselves. They have sufficient will and motivation to fight and resist, and we saw that happen. Now, the motivation of the Russian army to continue the fight is zero. Zero. I think contrary to what propaganda is saying on television, I'm sure Russian military servicemen, they really understand what kind of exercise they're being involved right now. They really see that they're destroying peaceful Ukrainian towns and villages, right? They're killing innocent people. you see, I mean, I saw a lot of interviews of detained Russian military servicemen detained by Ukrainians. This is actually what I expected them to say, that yeah, we fully realize what we do. You cannot keep the morale in this sort of exercise, right? And many of the real combat ready forces have been decimated during the first few weeks of campaign. So Putin can only continue to bombard Ukrainian cities. He cannot advance. At some point, he will have to concede defeat in his initial plan to capture major Ukrainian cities and most of Ukrainian territory. And really, you got to understand that this is a tooth and nail fight for the hearts and minds of every single Russian. Like what I'm saying to my viewers and Navalny Live channel, my YouTube channel, we have millions of viewers and very much increased audience in the past few weeks of the conflict. And what I keep saying is that you got to talk to everybody around you and try to convince just one person a day, one person a week, okay, one person a month. Just anybody is very helpful. Tell them the truth. Try to get them away from this, none of Putin's propaganda, imperial propaganda reality. The more people are learning that this is not just a small-scale peacekeeping operation in Donbass, but a full-scale war and assault on peaceful Ukrainian cities, you will see more of that episodes like this brave employee of Channel 1 coming out on the air with anti-war slogan, Marina Ovsyannikova. You'll see more of that. You'll see more of that awakening. However, it's a very hard job because there's a brutal censorship involved. There's new draconian laws introduced that Russians might get up to 15 years in jail for denying the peacekeeping role of Russian military forces, So up to 15 years in jail. That's pretty scary. That's pretty scary for Russians. I have to say so much admiration for many, like millions of brave people who continue to spread the word of truth. Many of them come to protest in the streets. So about 20,000 people arrested overall across the country. That's a township. 20,000 people. That's a township that was arrested across the country since the invasion began and the protests against the invasion began.